Who gave you permission to touch that piano? Emily Dawson's fingers froze above the final note. Every employee in the hallway turned toward the cold voice. No one dared breathe. Standing behind her was Matteo Santoro, the impossibly handsome billionaire who ruled Santoro International, and, in the shadows, one of the world's most feared mafia organizations. Everyone inside the estate knew a single, unbreakable rule. No one ever touched his late mother's grand piano. Emily slowly rose from the bench, her cleaning gloves still tucked into her apron. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll leave immediately." The security guards waited for Matteo's command. Instead, he studied her with eyes that suddenly looked far older than 43. Then he asked quietly, "Who taught you to play my mother's favorite song?" For the first time in years, the man everyone feared sounded heartbreakingly close to tears. Emily expected security to escort her out before she could even remove her cleaning gloves. Instead, Matteo Santoro dismissed every guard with a slight movement of his hand. "Leave us." No one questioned the order. Within seconds, the enormous music room became silent again. Emily kept her eyes lowered. During 3 years of supervising the night cleaning crew at Santoro Estate, she had learned never to look directly at the man whose reputation frightened politicians, billionaires, and criminals alike. "I broke your rule," she said quietly. "You don't have to explain anything. I'll collect my things tonight." Matteo didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the grand piano. "My mother played that piece every Sunday morning." Emily swallowed. "I didn't know." "No," he replied softly. "You couldn't have." Another long silence settled between them. She waited for anger, for dismissal, for punishment. Instead, he asked another unexpected question. "Where did you study?" Emily hesitated. "I attended the New York Conservatory when I was younger." His eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. "You attended. Past tense." "My father became ill." The explanation was simple, almost rehearsed. "I left school. Someone had to work. You never returned." She smiled politely, though sadness flickered behind it. Real life doesn't always pause while we chase dreams. For the first time that evening, Matteo looked directly at her. She wore a faded cleaning uniform. Her hair was tied into a loose bun. After a long shift, her shoes showed signs of years of use. Nothing about her appearance suggested a gifted pianist. Yet moments earlier, she had played with the kind of tenderness that even internationally celebrated performers often failed to capture. "You remembered every phrase exactly as my mother played it." Emily looked embarrassed. "I only remembered how the melody was supposed to feel." That answer lingered in the room longer than any music had. Most pianists pursued perfection. She had pursued emotion. Matteo finally spoke. I haven't slept through a full night since my mother died." Emily blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "The doctors prescribe medication," he continued. "My advisors recommend vacations. My security chief recommends working less." A faint, humorless smile appeared. "None of them work." She remained silent. "I listened to you for nearly 10 minutes before you noticed me." His voice grew quieter. For 10 minutes, this house felt alive again. Emily's heart tightened. She had never imagined the feared Mafia Boss speaking with such unguarded honesty. He stepped toward the piano, gently brushing one hand across its polished surface. "I ordered everyone to stay away from it, because hearing anyone play badly felt like losing my mother a second time." He turned toward her. "You didn't." Emily struggled to respond. "I was only cleaning the room." "And then?" "I saw the piano." "You couldn't resist." A shy laugh escaped before she could stop it. "I suppose not." The sound surprised both of them. Matteo realized it was the first genuine laughter he had heard inside the mansion in years. Then he made a request that would soon become the most talked about rumor among the staff. "Come back tomorrow night." Emily frowned. "I'm sorry. Play again." She stared at him, convinced she had misunderstood. "I don't think that would be appropriate. I wasn't asking as your employer." His expression softened. "I was asking as a son." The words carried none of the authority that had built an international empire. Only grief. Emily looked toward the piano once more. "I haven't practiced seriously in almost 15 years. It didn't sound that way. I'll make mistakes. I've made far worse." She couldn't help smiling again. For the first time, the intimidating man standing before her seemed less like an untouchable legend and more like someone carrying a loneliness too heavy for one person. Still, uncertainty lingered. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Matteo answered without hesitation. "Finish your shift. Return here every evening. Play whatever your heart chooses. And allow this house to remember what music sounds like." Emily's eyes filled with emotion. "No audience?" "None." "No pressure?" "None." "No expectations?" He shook his head. "Only one." She waited. "Don't disappear without saying goodbye." She nodded slowly. "I'll come tomorrow." A rare look of relief crossed Matteo's face. As Emily quietly left the music room, neither of them noticed 2 house employees standing around the corner. They hadn't heard the conversation. They had only seen the impossible. The Mafia Boss had personally escorted the cleaning supervisor to the door and thanked her before she left. By sunrise, whispers had spread through every hallway of Santoro estate. The cleaning lady had been summoned to the boss's private office. No one believed she still had a job. No one could imagine that, beginning the following night, the loneliest room in the mansion would become the one place where both of them would finally begin to heal. The following evening, Emily finished inspecting the final wing of the estate before making her way to the music room. She paused outside the door. For a moment, she wondered if the previous night had been nothing more than an emotional misunderstanding. Perhaps Matteo had regretted his invitation. Perhaps someone would stop her before she entered. Instead, the door was already open. The grand piano waited beneath the soft glow of a single chandelier. On top of it rested a steaming cup of chamomile tea. Beside the cup lay a handwritten note. "For your throat." Ms. Emily smiled despite herself. No one had ever prepared something so thoughtful for her before a performance, even when she had been a conservatory student. She carefully sat at the piano. A few minutes later, Matteo entered without making a sound. Unlike the impeccably tailored businessman everyone saw during the day, tonight he had removed his suit jacket and rolled his sleeves to his forearms. He looked less like an untouchable billionaire and more like an exhausted man who had forgotten what rest felt like. He nodded once. Emily returned the gesture. Neither of them spoke. She simply began to play. The melody floated gently through the enormous room, filling corners that had known only silence for years. Matteo closed his eyes. For nearly an hour, neither interrupted the other. When the final note faded, Emily stood. "I should get back to work." "You've already finished your shift." She blinked. "How did you know?" "I asked your supervisor." Emily laughed softly. "I am the supervisor." For a brief second, Matteo looked genuinely puzzled. Then he rubbed his forehead. "I suppose that explains why no one was looking for you. It also explains why I'll be answering questions tomorrow." His expression grew curious. "What questions?" Emily folded her arms. "The staff already thinks I'm either being promoted or interrogated." Matteo looked almost offended. "They're afraid of me." She raised an eyebrow. "Shouldn't they be?" A pause. Then, unexpectedly, "They probably should." Emily burst into laughter. The sound echoed through the room. Matteo stared at her, unsure whether to smile. Eventually, one corner of his mouth lifted. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him look 10 years younger. From that evening onward, a quiet routine emerged. Every night, Emily completed her work. Every night, Matteo arrived shortly afterward. Some evenings she played Chopin, others Debussy. Sometimes she simply improvised melodies inspired by the rain outside or the wind moving through the gardens. Matteo never requested a particular piece. He simply listened. As the days passed, silence slowly transformed into conversation. One evening, Emily noticed a stack of untouched dinner trays beside the fireplace. She frowned. "You skipped dinner again?" Matteo didn't look away from the documents in his hands. "I'm busy." "You've been busy every night." "I own several hundred companies." "And?" They require attention. She crossed her arms. So does your stomach. He continued reading. I'm fine. Emily walked over, took the file from his hands, and closed it. Matteo stared at her. No one had ever dared interrupt him during work, especially not over dinner. She pointed toward the untouched tray. Eat. His bodyguards, standing discreetly outside the room, exchanged horrified glances. Surely no employee would survive speaking to him like that. Instead, Matteo sighed with surprising obedience. You sound exactly like my mother. Emily immediately looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. A faint warmth entered his voice. I've missed hearing that. The next evening brought another unexpected exchange. Emily arrived to find Matteo staring at 3 computer screens filled with financial reports. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. She set her music folder down. When did you last sleep? I'm sleeping now. She looked around. While standing, I'm resting mentally. Emily laughed. That's not how biology works. It works for me. No. She walked behind him, reached forward, and gently closed his laptop. Matteo blinked. What are you doing? Saving your eyesight. I was reading. You were squinting. I wasn't. You absolutely were. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. Then Matteo surrendered. I've never lost so many arguments to one person. Emily smiled innocently. That's because you're arguing against common sense. He couldn't disagree. Soon the household staff began noticing small but remarkable changes. The boss no longer missed breakfast every morning. He occasionally left his office before midnight. His temper became noticeably shorter with paperwork, but noticeably gentler with people. Even senior executives whispered about the transformation. No one knew its cause. Only a handful of guards realized that every evening, somewhere inside the mansion, piano music drifted through the halls. One rainy night, the electricity briefly flickered. The room fell into darkness. Emily stopped playing. I'm sorry. You don't have to stop. I can't see the keys. Matteo quietly lit several candles from the fireplace. Their warm glow reflected across the polished piano. Emily smiled. This feels like another century. My mother preferred candlelight. So do I. She resumed playing. Without the harsh electric lights, the room felt softer, more intimate. When the final chord faded, neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Matteo asked, "Why do you always smile while you play?" Emily considered the question. Because it's the only time I forget what people expect me to be. What do they expect? She shrugged. A cleaning lady. A plus-size woman. Someone who should stay invisible. Matteo looked at her carefully. I've never once thought of you that way. Emily met his eyes. That's because you always close yours when I begin playing. Antoninus. For the first time, Matteo realized she was right. He had memorized every emotion in her music, yet he had barely noticed the quiet courage of the woman creating it. That night, long after Emily had gone home, Matteo remained alone beside the piano. He touched one key lightly. The note echoed through the room. Then he smiled to himself. He had originally invited Emily back because her music reminded him of his mother. Somewhere along the way, he had begun looking forward to something else entirely. He found himself counting the hours until she walked through the door with her worn music folder, gentle smile, and endless determination to make sure he actually ate dinner. And although he wasn't ready to admit it, not even to himself, the mansion no longer felt empty because of the piano. It felt alive because Emily was in it. By the third week, the nightly ritual had become the one appointment Matteo Santoro never cancelled. Board meetings could be rescheduled. Private flights could wait. International investors could be kept on hold. But every evening, shortly after 9 p.m, he walked away from the demands of his empire and entered the music room. For 1 hour, he was no longer the feared man who negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions and commanded unquestioned loyalty. He was simply a son who missed his mother, and increasingly, a man who looked forward to seeing Emily Dawson. Emily noticed the change long before he did. The rigid lines in his face had softened. His replies were no longer clipped and formal. Sometimes he even arrived carrying 2 cups of tea instead of 1. You remembered. She accepted the cup with a grateful smile. You said, "Peppermint helps after a long shift." I didn't think you were listening. I listen more than I speak. She laughed. I've noticed. That evening, instead of beginning immediately, Emily remained seated with her hands folded in her lap. You seem distracted, Matteo observed. My brother called earlier. The music teacher? She looked surprised. You remembered Lucas. You've mentioned him several times. A warm smile spread across her face. He's stubborn. He keeps insisting I should audition for local orchestras. And you keep refusing. She nodded. He doesn't understand. Help me understand. Emily stared at the silent piano. When my father got sick, the hospital bills arrived faster than hope. She spoke calmly, but every word carried years of quiet sacrifice. My mother had already passed away. Lucas was still in school. I had one choice: stay at the conservatory and chase a dream, or leave and earn enough to keep my family together. She gave a small shrug. I chose my family. Would you make the same decision again? Without hesitation, she answered, every single time. Matteo lowered his eyes. There was no regret in her voice. Only love. But, she admitted after a pause, sometimes I wonder what that other version of me became. The one who believed she belonged on a concert stage. She smiled sadly. She's probably forgotten my name. Matteo remained silent. He understood hidden grief better than most people. His own life had been shaped by choices that demanded sacrifice. The difference was that the world admired his sacrifices. Almost no one had noticed Emily's. She had quietly exchanged applause for overtime shifts, concert halls for cleaning supplies, standing ovations for invisible labor. Yet she carried no bitterness, only kindness. That realization stayed with Matteo long after she left. The following morning, while his executive team presented quarterly reports, he interrupted the meeting. "I need information." The room instantly fell silent. His chief of staff opened a notebook. "About what, sir?" "The New York Conservatory." Within 24 hours, a confidential report arrived. Emily Dawson had graduated near the top of her class before withdrawing during her final performance season. Several professors had predicted an international career. One instructor had described her interpretation as technically gifted, but emotionally unforgettable. Matteo continued reading. Attached was an old newspaper clipping featuring a photograph of a much younger Emily sitting confidently at a grand piano. She looked radiant, hopeful, completely unaware of how differently life would unfold. He stared at the image for several minutes. Then he made a phone call. "I need a favor." On the other end was the director of the city's largest cultural foundation. If an anonymous donor wished to sponsor emerging classical musicians, the conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. By the end, a new charity concert celebrating overlooked local talent was quietly entering its planning stages. Matteo never mentioned Emily's name, not once. He intended the opportunity to find her naturally, or so he told himself. In truth, every detail had been designed with one pianist in mind. That evening, Emily noticed his unusually thoughtful mood. "Something good happened today?" He smiled faintly. "Perhaps." "You sound mysterious." "I've been accused of worse." She rolled her eyes playfully. "I'm beginning to think you enjoy speaking in riddles. I spend my days negotiating with people who hide their true intentions, and your evenings, I spend them with someone who says exactly what she means." Emily looked down, suddenly self-conscious. "I hope that's a compliment." "It is." There was no hesitation in his voice. She sat at the piano, but before placing her hands on the keys, she asked quietly, "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" "You already know one of my biggest secrets." "Fair point." She took a slow breath. "Sometimes, when I'm cleaning empty ballrooms, I imagine they're filled with people." Matteo listened without interrupting. "I pretend I've just finished a concert. I imagine the applause. I bow." And then she laughed softly at herself. "I pick up a mop and finish polishing the floor." The room fell silent. Not because the story was dramatic, because it was heartbreakingly ordinary. Dreams rarely disappeared in grand tragedies. More often, they faded beneath responsibilities that no one else noticed. Matteo walked toward the piano. "You never stopped being a pianist." Emily shook her head gently. "I stopped performing." "That's different." She looked at him curiously. "How?" "A title depends on other people." He rested one hand lightly against the piano. "Who you are depends on you." Those words settled deep inside her. No one had ever separated her identity from her occupation before. For years, she had introduced herself as a cleaning supervisor. Never as a musician, never as an artist, never as the woman who still carried entire symphonies inside her heart. That night, her playing changed. The music became lighter, braver, filled with quiet hope. Matteo noticed immediately. He closed his eyes, listening not just to the melody, but to the woman behind it. Only then did he realize an uncomfortable truth. At first, he had waited all day to hear the piano. Now, he found himself watching the clock long before the music ever began. He anticipated her laughter, her gentle scolding whenever he skipped meals, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear before playing, the warmth she carried into rooms that had forgotten how to feel alive. It wasn't the music he missed during the day anymore. It was Emily. And for perhaps the first time since losing his mother, that realization frightened him far more than loneliness ever had. A month after Emily's first unexpected performance in the music room, invitations began circulating among the city's most influential families. The Santoro Foundation would host its annual charity gala to raise money for children's arts education. Unlike previous years, this event would include a live classical piano performance. The announcement immediately attracted media attention. No performer had been named. Within the mansion, the staff assumed Matteo would invite one of Europe's celebrated concert pianists. Emily barely paid attention. She was more concerned with polishing marble floors before hundreds of distinguished guests arrived. When Lucas heard about the gala, however, he became unusually excited. "Emily," he said over the phone, "this is exactly the kind of event you should play." She laughed. "I'm supervising the cleaning crew." "No," he insisted. "You're a pianist." She smiled at his determination. "I appreciate your faith. You don't need my faith. You need your own." After hanging up, Emily stood silently for a long moment. She wanted to believe him. But years of hearing comments about her appearance always returned before confidence could. Too big, too ordinary, too invisible. Those words had followed her long enough to sound like facts. Meanwhile, preparations for the gala transformed the estate into controlled chaos. Florists arrived before sunrise. Designers inspected every ballroom. Security teams rehearsed arrival routes for diplomats, celebrities, and business leaders. One afternoon, Matteo walked through the ballroom, reviewing final details, when he noticed Emily quietly adjusting fresh flowers that had begun to lean. "Those aren't part of your job." She smiled. They looked lonely. He chuckled. You rescue flowers now? I rescue anything that's about to fall. He looked at her with unmistakable warmth. I've noticed. Before either could continue, elegant footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Isabella Moreau entered surrounded by assistants carrying portfolios and schedules. She was internationally respected for organizing prestigious concerts across Europe. Confident, beautiful, impeccably dressed. She approached Matteo with practiced familiarity. Everything is progressing perfectly. Her eyes drifted toward Emily. And this is our cleaning supervisor. Matteo answered simply. Emily nodded politely. It's nice to meet you. Isabella offered only a brief glance before returning her attention to Matteo. We should discuss the featured performer. As they reviewed logistics, Emily quietly resumed arranging decorations nearby. She had no intention of listening. Unfortunately, Isabella had no intention of lowering her voice. The audience expects elegance, refinement, someone who looks extraordinary before playing the first note. Matteo remained expressionless. Go on. I've heard rumors. She smiled dismissively. Apparently, some employees believe your cleaning lady plays piano. Emily froze. Isabella laughed lightly. I'm sure she's charming, but charity concerts are still public events. Her eyes traveled deliberately over Emily's curvy figure and simple uniform. We can't place someone like this on stage. Several nearby staff members looked away uncomfortably. Isabella continued, as though discussing furniture rather than a person. People don't buy tickets simply to hear music. They buy an image. A luxury gala deserves someone who looks like a concert pianist. Emily felt heat rising to her face. Old memories flooded back. Competition judges complimenting her technique before recommending a slimmer stage presence. Photographers suggesting different camera angles, whispered comments in conservatory hallways. Years had passed. The words had changed very little. She quietly lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. No one was certain whom she was apologizing to. Perhaps to herself. Without another word, she picked up her supply cart. I'll finish cleaning elsewhere. She walked toward the exit with measured steps, refusing to let anyone see the tears threatening to form. Across the ballroom, every employee waited for Matteo's response. Instead of calling Emily back, he watched her leave. Only after the doors closed did he turn slowly toward Isabella. His voice remained calm. Tell me. She smiled confidently. Yes. When you organize concerts, what exactly do you believe people come to hear? She blinked. The finest performers. And how do you recognize one? Experience, presentation, professional image. Matteo nodded thoughtfully. So, appearance? In part. He looked toward the now empty doorway through which Emily had disappeared. My mother taught piano for 30 years. Isabella remained silent. She often said the fastest way to identify someone who understands music, he paused, is that they stop seeing the performer and start hearing the heart. The room fell completely still. Isabella attempted a diplomatic smile. I meant no offense, but you caused it. His tone never rose. It didn't need to. You evaluated someone's worth before hearing a single note. That's not excellence. That's prejudice. For the first time, Isabella looked genuinely uncomfortable. It was simply a practical observation. No. Matteo's answer was immediate. It was an unkind one. He ended the discussion without another word and walked away. Across the estate, Emily hid inside a quiet storage room where unused decorations were kept. She told herself she shouldn't be upset. Isabella didn't know her. The woman had only voiced what countless others had implied for years. Still, the words reopened wounds Emily believed had finally healed. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had once dreamed of performing in great concert halls. Now they smelled faintly of furniture polish. When Matteo found her nearly 20 minutes later, she quickly wiped away the evidence of her tears. I should get back to work. He noticed the forced smile immediately. It wasn't true. She avoided his eyes. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Emily shook her head gently. Maybe Isabella is right. I clean beautifully. I play well enough for an empty room. But people don't want someone like me on a stage. The sentence broke something inside Matteo, not because she doubted her talent, because she had been taught to doubt her own place in the world. And in that moment, he made a decision that would astonish the city's elite and change both of their lives forever. The following morning, the ballroom filled with investors, foundation trustees, senior executives, and members of the gala planning committee. Crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead, while assistants hurried between tables with schedules and revised seating charts. At the center of it all stood Isabella Moreau, confidently presenting the final entertainment program. She smiled as she reached the final page, and our headline, Pianist, will be announced after contract signatures are complete. Everyone nodded approvingly. Across the room, Matteo Santoro entered without fanfare. Conversation immediately stopped. He greeted no one. Instead, he walked directly to the head of the conference table. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "there will be one change." Isabella maintained her polished smile. "Of course, which performer would you prefer to feature?" Matteo looked directly at her. "You misunderstand. It isn't the performer. It's the organizer." Silence swept through the room. Several executives exchanged confused glances. Isabella frowned slightly. "I'm not sure I follow." "You will not be organizing this gala." The words landed with astonishing force. "Excuse me. Your contract has been terminated." Her confident expression disappeared. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There isn't. She forced a nervous laugh. Surely we're not discussing yesterday. We are. It was merely a private opinion. It revealed your professional judgment. Matteo's voice remained perfectly controlled. The Santoro Foundation exists to create opportunity, not to protect prejudice. One of the investors cautiously interrupted. Mr. Santoro, replacing an internationally respected organizer this close to the event, could create considerable complications. Matteo turned toward him. So can rewarding discrimination. No one spoke again. Isabella tried one final time. You can't honestly be cancelling months of preparation, because I questioned whether a cleaning employee belonged on stage. Matteo answered immediately. No, I'm cancelling your contract because you decided someone's appearance mattered more than their ability. He slid a folder across the table. Our legal department has completed the termination documents. Her hands trembled slightly. This will become public. I expect it will. It could damage the foundation. It will strengthen it. The room fell completely silent. After a long moment, Isabella gathered the folder without another word. She left with far less confidence than she had carried in. The heavy doors closed behind her. Only then did Matteo speak again. The gala will proceed as scheduled. One trustee looked puzzled. But we still need a featured pianist. We already have one. Everyone waited. Matteo looked toward the event director, Emily Dawson. For several seconds, nobody reacted. Then quiet whispers spread around the room. The cleaning supervisor? Isn't she an employee? Has anyone even heard her perform? Matteo allowed every question to fade before answering. I have. And that is enough. The meeting ended with stunned silence, replacing debate. By lunchtime, the news had spread across every department of Santoro International. The billionaire chairman had fired an internationally renowned organizer and promoted a cleaning supervisor to headline the city's most prestigious charity concert. Rumors multiplied by the hour. Some believed Matteo had lost his judgment. Others insisted Emily must have hidden connections no one knew about. A few simply admired the decision. Emily knew nothing until Lucas called. His voice exploded through the phone. Emily, what happened? I just saw the announcement online. What announcement? You've been named the featured pianist for the Santoro Foundation Gala. Emily laughed. Lucas, that's not funny. I'm serious. She opened her phone. There it was. Her name printed beneath the event logo. Featured charity performance. Emily Dawson. Her hands immediately began to shake. No. She whispered the word to herself. There has to be a mistake. Within minutes, she hurried across the estate, searching for Matteo. She finally found him alone in the music room. You announced my name. I did. You never asked me. I knew you would refuse. I am refusing. Her voice echoed through the room. I can't do this. You can. I can't. She stepped back from the piano. These people attend concerts performed by world-famous musicians. They'll laugh. They'll wonder why the cleaning lady is sitting at the piano. They'll see exactly what Isabella saw. Matteo remained remarkably calm. No. They'll hear what I heard. Emily shook her head. You believe in me because you've only seen me here. In private, in a safe room. Not under stage lights. Not in front of hundreds of strangers. Her breathing grew uneven. I'll freeze. I'll disappoint everyone. You won't. How do you know? Because I've watched you. He walked toward her slowly. I've watched you finish 12-hour shifts without complaining. I've watched you encourage employees who felt invisible. I've watched you treat every person in this house with dignity. I've watched you revive a room that grief had abandoned. He stopped only a few feet away. The piano has never frightened you. Only people's opinions. Emily lowered her eyes. They've always mattered. I know. His voice softened. They shouldn't. Tears filled her eyes. You don't understand. No. I understand perfectly. She looked up. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who judged others before learning who they were. He gave a faint smile. They feared my power. They admired my money. They respected my name. Very few ever saw me. He gently rested one hand on the piano. My mother did. Now he met Emily's eyes with complete sincerity. So do you. Emotion caught in her throat. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, she whispered, What if I fail? Matteo answered without hesitation. Then you'll fail while doing what you love. That is infinitely better than succeeding while hiding from it. The room fell silent once more. Emily looked at the familiar piano. For years, it had been a secret, a place where forgotten dreams briefly came alive. Now someone was asking her to carry those dreams into the light. The idea terrified her, yet beneath the fear, something else had begun to grow. Hope. Not because she suddenly believed she was ready, but because for the first time in 15 years, someone else believed enough for both of them. Emily almost declined the invitation 3 different times during the following week. Each morning, she convinced herself the announcement had been made too quickly. Each afternoon, she rehearsed excuses. Each evening, Matteo quietly dismantled every one of them. He never pressured her. He simply showed up. Sometimes with tea, sometimes with sheet music, sometimes with nothing more than patient silence. One evening, she entered the music room carrying a worn leather folder. I found these. She placed yellowed pages on the piano, my old recital programs. The paper had softened with age. Photographs showed a younger Emily standing beside concert pianos, smiling with effortless confidence. Matteo studied them carefully. You look happy? I was. She touched one of the photographs. I remember believing my future had already been written, and now I feel like I'm borrowing someone else's dream. Matteo gently returned the program to her. No, I think your dream has simply been waiting. Emily smiled sadly. Dreams don't usually wait 15 years. Perhaps the right audience does. His answer stayed with her long after rehearsal began. Instead of demanding perfection, Matteo encouraged something completely different. Play the version that sounds like you. Emily frowned. That's terrible advice for classical music. It wasn't advice for music. It was advice for life. She looked at him for a long moment before laughing. You really do enjoy speaking in riddles, and you always solve them. Night after night, confidence returned in tiny pieces. Her fingers became steadier. The hesitation between movements disappeared. Most importantly, the joy slowly returned to her expression. The mansion staff began inventing excuses to pass by the music room. Gardeners finished their work nearby. Kitchen employees volunteered for late shifts. Even security guards quietly adjusted patrol routes. Nobody wanted to interrupt. They simply wanted to listen. One evening, after Emily completed a particularly emotional performance, applause echoed from the hallway. She startled. The door slowly opened. Several employees immediately looked embarrassed. "We're sorry," one housekeeper said. "We didn't mean to interrupt. We only—" She hesitated, didn't want to leave. Emily's cheeks flushed. "You've been listening." "For days." Another employer smiled. "You make the whole house feel different." The compliments overwhelmed her more than criticism ever had. For years, she had assumed no one noticed her. Now she realized people had always noticed. They simply hadn't known her. After everyone dispersed, Emily looked toward Matteo. "You planned that." He raised an innocent eyebrow. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "You absolutely do." "I merely forgot to close the door." She laughed. "Liar." "I prefer strategic optimist." She shook her head. "You would have made a terrible lawyer." I became something much more complicated. For the first time, Emily didn't think about the rumors surrounding his hidden life. She simply saw the man who had spent weeks rebuilding confidence she hadn't believed could ever return. The evening of the gala finally arrived. Luxury cars lined the entrance to the Santoro estate. Television cameras gathered outside. Business leaders, diplomats, artists, and philanthropists filled the magnificent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, while a gleaming concert grand stood beneath a single spotlight. Backstage, Emily stared at the piano from behind the curtain. "I can't." Her breathing quickened. "My hands are shaking." Lucas gently squeezed her shoulder. "They're shaking because this matters. I'll disappoint everyone." "No. You'll remind them why music exists." When Lucas stepped away to greet other guests, Matteo quietly joined her. Neither spoke immediately. The sounds of polite conversation drifted through the curtain. Emily whispered, "What if they only see the cleaning lady?" Matteo answered without hesitation, "Then they haven't looked long enough." She closed her eyes. "I still hear Isabella's voice?" "So do I." Emily looked surprised. "I hear it every time you doubt yourself." He stepped closer. "Then I remember something." "What?" "The first night I heard you play." His voice became softer. "I wasn't thinking about appearances. I wasn't thinking about reputation. I wasn't even thinking about myself. I was thinking that for the first time since my mother died, someone had given my home its heartbeat back." Tears shimmered in Emily's eyes. "You've already changed one life. Tonight, you simply let others hear what I already know." The stage manager approached. "Miss Dawson, we're ready." Emily inhaled slowly, then nodded. The ballroom lights dimmed. Conversations faded. A master of ceremonies introduced the evening's featured performer. A ripple of surprise spread across the audience as Emily Dawson walked onto the stage, wearing an elegant midnight blue gown. She wasn't transformed into someone else. She simply looked like the woman she had always been. Graceful, warm, beautiful, confident enough to take one more step, then another. A few guests exchanged uncertain glances. Others recognized the name from the morning's headlines. Several whispered about the cleaning supervisor. Emily heard none of it. She reached the piano, sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. The opening notes floated gently through the ballroom. Within seconds, every whisper disappeared. The melody carried tenderness instead of spectacle, hope instead of performance. It sounded less like a concert and more like someone telling the truth without speaking. Movement after movement unfolded with quiet, emotional power. Some guests smiled. Others quietly wiped away tears they hadn't expected. Several children, seated near the front, leaned forward, completely captivated. Even experienced musicians in attendance looked at one another in silent admiration. When the final chord faded into stillness, Emily lowered her hands. For one heartbeat, the ballroom remained silent. Then someone stood. Another followed. Then another. Within moments, the entire audience rose to its feet. The standing ovation thundered through the hall, not because they had witnessed flawless technique, but because they had witnessed extraordinary courage. Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed. She had imagined embarrassment. Instead, she found acceptance. She looked toward the front row. Matteo was already standing, applauding harder than anyone else. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. In that moment, applause faded into the background. Only gratitude remained. Later that evening, after the final guests had departed and the ballroom had grown quiet once more, Matteo found Emily sitting alone beside the same piano. She smiled. "I guess I didn't embarrass myself." He smiled back. Not even a little. She laughed through happy tears. "I almost ran away." "I'm very glad you didn't." Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Matteo took one careful step closer. "There is something I've wanted to tell you." Emily looked up. "I thought I fell in love with the woman who brought music back into my mother's home." He paused, then gently shook his head. "I was wrong. I fell in love with the woman who reminded me that broken hearts can still learn new songs." Emily's eyes filled again. For once, she couldn't find words, so she reached for his hand. He intertwined his fingers with hers. No grand declaration was needed. The music had already said everything their hearts had struggled to express. Months passed. But the charity concert remained one of the city's most talked about evenings. Newspapers praised Emily Dawson's extraordinary performance. Music critics wrote less about technical brilliance and more about emotional honesty. Parents began sending letters to the Santoro Foundation, describing how their children had started practicing piano again after watching her performance online. Emily read every letter. Each one reminded her of the young woman she had once been. Instead of returning to the concert circuit, however, she chose a different dream. With Lucas's help, she transformed an abandoned neighborhood community center into a welcoming music academy. The walls were painted in warm colors. Old classrooms became practice studios. A modest recital hall replaced what had once been a storage room. There were no velvet ropes, no intimidating auditions. Only one requirement stood at the entrance. Every child deserves the chance to be heard. Some students arrived carrying expensive instruments. Others had never touched a piano before. Some came wearing polished shoes. Others came straight from school in worn sneakers. Emily greeted every child with exactly the same smile. She remembered what it felt like to wonder whether she belonged. She refused to let another generation carry that same doubt. One afternoon, Lucas noticed something unusual while reviewing the Academy's financial records. He walked into Emily's office holding several folders. "Have you looked at these?" She glanced up from a stack of student applications. "What is it?" "Our scholarship fund." "What about it?" "It keeps growing." Emily frowned. "I thought we only had enough for 20 children. Lucas smiled in disbelief. "We're funding nearly 80 now." She stared at the numbers. "There must be a mistake." "There isn't. Every month, another anonymous donation arrives." Emily immediately knew who was responsible. That evening, after classes ended, she drove to Santoro Estate. She found Matteo exactly where she expected. The music room, the piano. Some traditions, she realized, should never change. He looked up with a familiar smile. "You're here earlier than usual." She placed the financial reports on the piano. "You've been funding the academy." He glanced at the papers without surprise. I've been helping. You promised me the foundation wasn't involved. It isn't. She folded her arms. Then who is the anonymous donor? Matteo looked almost amused. I believe the donor requested anonymity. She couldn't help laughing. You're impossible. I've heard that before. Emily stepped closer. Why didn't you tell me? His expression became thoughtful. Because the academy belongs to you, and to my company, not to my reputation, and certainly not to headlines about philanthropy. He looked toward the empty practice rooms visible through the windows. The children don't need to know my name. They only need the opportunity. Emily studied him quietly. The man the world feared most had never asked for recognition when doing something kind. Perhaps that was why his kindness mattered so much. Several weeks later, the academy hosted its first student recital. Parents filled every seat. Children nervously waited behind the curtain. Emily watched them with tears already gathering in her eyes. One little girl tugged gently at her sleeve. Miss Emily? Yes? What if I make a mistake? Emily knelt until they were eye level. Then you'll make music. The little girl smiled. Really? Emily nodded. The audience won't remember one wrong note. They'll remember how brave you were. The child walked onto the stage with new confidence. From the back row, Matteo witnessed the exchange in silence. He realized Emily had become exactly the teacher his mother would have admired. Not because she created perfect musicians, because she created hopeful people. After the recital, a local journalist approached Matteo near the entrance. Mr. Santoro, may I ask one question? He nodded politely. Many people have discovered that someone anonymously funded dozens of music scholarships. The reporter smiled knowingly. Was it you? Matteo neither confirmed nor denied it. Instead, he looked toward the recital hall, where children were laughing while proudly carrying their music books home. A quiet smile appeared on his face. My business empire already knows how to build powerful people. He paused before continuing. Emily reminded me how to build hopeful ones. The journalist lowered the notebook. For a rare moment, there was nothing else worth asking. As the evening came to an end, Emily stepped outside beneath a sky filled with fading sunset colors. She found Matteo waiting beside the garden path. Neither hurried to speak. They had learned that silence could also be a conversation. She slipped her hand into his. It felt as natural as the first melody she had ever played for him. Do you ever miss the quiet days? She asked softly. The nights when it was only you, me, and your mother's piano. He smiled. I thought I would. She tilted her head. But I've realized something. What? My mother believed music was never meant to stay inside one room. He looked toward the academy, where children were still laughing through the open windows. Neither is love. Emily leaned gently against his shoulder. Months earlier, she had believed her story had ended the day she left conservatory. Matteo had believed his ended when his mother's piano fell silent. They had both been wrong. Sometimes, the most beautiful performances begin long after the audience believes the concert is over. And together, hand in hand, they walked toward a future where forgotten dreams became new beginnings, not only for themselves, but for every child who would one day discover that courage, kindness, and hope could create the most unforgettable music of all.